So hi, Kendra. Hi, Pashmeena.
Hi,
Hello.
how are you?
Thank you so much for joining us. People find it invaluable to know what other clients think, or if they're on the supplier side, what clients think and the perspectives, the challenges. So I think it's going to be really useful for everybody. So maybe we'll start with an introduction into your roles. And Kendra, for those of us outside the USA, James Smucker's not a massively famous name to us, familiar. Could you tell us a little bit about the company and how insights function within that and some of the brands that we probably have heard of, in fact?
Sure. Kendra Speed, I'm Director of Insights and Integrated Intelligence at JM Smucker. JM Smucker is a CPG, consumer packaged goods company here in the United States, also serving Canada and based in Orrville, Ohio, or Midwestern US. And some of the brands you may be familiar with are including, Folgers Coffee, Jif peanut butter, also Milkbone from a pet standpoint. So as you think about how we are structured as an insights function, we have food and beverage brands, and then we also have pet. So I lead the food and beverage insights and integrated intelligence team, where we have a series of senior managers leading each of food, beverage, and then we also have shopper included, as well as analytics, and then full teams beneath that. And it's also mirrored on the other end for pet. We report in through our innovation SVP, and that's the way that we sit. So we do end-to-end research all the way from very upstream out to shopper and retailer. So that's us at JM Smucker.
Thanks, Kendra. I think it's really interesting there to hear who you report in by, because there's a sort of, when I joined this industry back in the 70s, it was all about the marketing department. And now, of course, it's much more diverse. So that's really interesting to hear. Pashmeena, obviously people have heard of Google, but they may not know so much about what research and thought leadership means and your role there.
Yeah, of course. So Pashmeena, I am the head of industry for research and thought leadership at Google. I actually support our sales team. So there are 4 sectors at Google. I support one of those sectors, which is called the services sector. The services sector essentially are the Fortune 500 services for both personal use and for B2B. So it has everything from tech, B2B, business, industrial, manufacturing, which are B2B segments. And then it has everything from dating to careers to plumbing and lawn care and security services and higher education. So really, if you think about it, my customer is actually the seller at Google, who represents a suite of Fortune 500 clients. And I am conducting research primarily through third-party vendors in order to provide our sales teams with the research and insights that they need in order to really give a good understanding of how digital plays a role and the innovation that's happening within the consumer and B2B buyer purchase journeys, so that when they're sharing these insights with their clients, they're truly understanding who their customer's customer is. And then the thought leadership side of the house is actually externalizing that research outside of Google walls and our Google clients, and making sure that it gets into the hands of as many marketers, researchers, as possible, really. And so that's anything that you see outside of Google that might be on Adweek, or it might be on MIT or Bain. A lot of the partners that we work with, we're trying to externalize our research as well.
Thanks, Pashmeena. I'm just going to pick up on one of the things that you said there about using third parties, because I imagine quite a few people on the line would think, oh, Google, such a lot of information, but you highlight there that you're using third-party partners in terms of this. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's a little bit of a, I don't know if I should really like misnomer, but Google data that we have, we are not able to leverage for our own use. So it's pretty much a black box. I don't have access to Google internal data. I can't use that to share with other clients. I can't use clients' data to share it with other clients. I mean, you can imagine with regulation, that's obviously not okay. There are data points that are externally shareable, but they're the same ones that you would have access to when you go to trends.google.com and look at index search queries for certain terms or for brands. It's honestly the exact same access that I have, which is why we commission a lot of our research through third-party means.
Wonderful. And Kendra, so how does that sort of balance between internal and external work in JM Smucker?
Yeah, so generally, most of our work is in partnership with third-party agencies, vendors. So I will say almost the great majority, so like 98% of our work is in partnership with external vendors. I've been in other contexts, for instance, my previous role at Dropbox, where it was very heavy on kind of this internal research, where I will say the majority of the projects that we did were kind of do-it-yourself, leveraging, customer panels, online communities that we had set up. So it really seems to range the gamut nowadays as you think about where companies are deciding or how they're deciding to go about doing research.
Absolutely. So we're talking about quant research today, and that's really where we're focusing it. So what, Kendra, are your bread and butter go-to techniques in terms of quantitative research?
Yeah, so much of the work that I'm doing is kind of, your traditional CPG consumer and shopper research. So as I think about what the majority of those quantitative studies that we're doing, it's around, still evaluating our copy. And of course, there's a range of different methodologies that we might use there, but copy testing, concept testing, in-home use testing, a lot of forecasting, and understanding kind of a general overarching market opportunity. I will say that most of the quantitative research is still in a lot of these traditional methodologies.
And Pashmeena, what's bread and butter in terms of the sort of research you're talking about?
So, honestly, our bread and butter really lies around Clickstream. So we are always looking to vendors like SimilarWeb, ComScore, Verdo Analytics in order to understand customer journeys. What I like to say is kind of the what behind the why. So we do run qual analysis, or we do quant surveys that kind of get at the consumer perspective as said by the consumer or the B2B buyer. But I think you start getting behind, again, like that what behind the why when you start looking at their paths, right? And how they are navigating desktop, mobile app experiences to kind of get a layer deeper into the behaviors and the navigation of how a journey from maybe consideration to purchase and even loyalty and retention works.
Wonderful. So the majority is automatically collected style of information as opposed to asking people questions.
Correct. Yes. I think, the beauty of having kind of this layered approach of both the survey methodology or maybe an in-home interview, or maybe as Kendra mentioned, like it might just be a community, is you start really getting some nice hypotheses and some areas you kind of want to double click deeper into. Okay, well, like, why do they say those things? Well, let's look at what they're actually doing online. And so I think that this like 1-2 punch with kind of a little bit more of a quant approach with the Clickstream helps to kind of bring a lot of contextual wrapper to what's happening behind the scenes.
Wonderful. And Ray, I don't know if I can come in behind
Please.
that. As Pashmeena was talking, I wrote down one of our favorite, sayings within Smucker, where we talk about do versus say data. So really thinking about being able to get more in that behavioral context. And a lot for us is, in addition to some of the quantitative pieces I talked about, in bringing integrated intelligence and analytics into that, is really saying, how do we get the panel information? How do we get all of our sales data in line with what we're hearing or claimed, behavior from consumers alongside what they're actually doing. So I love that whole piece around do versus say data and wanting to be more in line with that as we look forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So staying with you for the moment, Kendra, we've talked about the mainstream that you do. What are the innovations, the new things that are catching your eye at the moment?
Yeah, so a lot of this is around experimentation. So I think about, across all different industries, we're always thinking about how do we get new products, new ideas to market faster. And so, I see a lot more happening as we work with our business partners and just saying, what can we do to experiment? How do we think about test marketing and really getting things out there in front of consumers earlier? So there's a lot of things that we're doing as it relates to methodologies and saying like, how might you put product concepts, products out there to be able to really understand what shoppers will do, and being able to collect that information very early on in the innovation cycle. So I have a lot of passion around thinking about the experimentation piece of things.
Fantastic. Pashmeena, what's catching your eye?
I mean, it's honestly along the same vein. So I cannot agree more that testing and experimenting, whether that's through like a DMA test or geolocation is what we like to call it, Google, where you're only running in one area and then you're looking at the differences where creative was running versus not running. Incrementality testing is really big for us too. I can give an example of a piece of work that we had done. It's very digitally centric, of course, it's Google, but it was around what is the value of running a YouTube ad? What is the value of running a YouTube and display ad? What is the value of running a YouTube display and search ad? And trying to understand the downstream impact on conversions or on a KPI that the advertiser is interested in order to showcase that there's a better together approach when you're running across diverse media versus just focusing on one. We could call it a halo effect or incrementality, but that's some of the work that we commission with third parties in order to better understand and showcase to our advertisers that you will see an outsized impact when you are diversified. But at the end of the day, it truly is an experimentation, right? Like you have to have the client or the advertiser willing and wanting to actually test this sort of work and be willing to kind of wait for the 6-month, 12-month period of time that it takes to actually see something like this come through. Because we know that a lot of the impact that we measure, especially when looking at things like incrementality, are longitudinal in nature. So I would say I 100% agree with Kendra, like this test, iterate, experiment approach, whether that's creative, whether that's media formats, whether that's in different locations. I think it's kind of nice, the different ways that you can experiment. And I only named 3. There's probably another 10 more that could come off the top of my head. It truly is kind of open for the different areas that you really want to double click into.
Right. Okay, that's really useful. I'm sure people are going to be trying to reach out to both of you with some new ideas and suggestions on exactly that. Now, if you're in the audience and you were thinking of asking a question, you'll need to type it in shortly because I've got just one more that I'm asking from my set, and then when I'm going to go and have a look at the Q&A and chat panel. So what are the main challenges? And we'll start with you, Kendra. What are the main challenges you're facing at the moment in terms of insights?
So challenges, or I prefer to think about them as opportunities as we think about growing. So there are a lot of the similar themes I think about, Ray, even in the information that you share via NewMR as we think about where we need to go. So some of the opportunities exist in really thinking about how do we get from just a pure risk mitigation orientation to really being kind of growth agents for the organization, which really talks about moving into the place of thought partnership, thought leadership, and moving into the driver's seat from an insight standpoint. So I think about that as one of the greatest opportunities that we're looking at today from a Smucker team. And what that then calls for are some mindset shifts. And so as we think about these shifts in mindset, it's shifts among, my team as we think about showing up as an insights team, but also in our business partners in thinking about being really laser focused. There's so many things we can learn about. How do we focus in on those items that are going to have the greatest business impact for the company and for the brands in which we support? So those are the things that I think about from day in, day out. They aren't necessarily just rooted in methodologies, but they're rooted in how we show up as business partners.
Great. And Pashmeena, your challenges at Google?
It's similar in that when I'm conducting research on behalf of our clients, and so we have a certain amount of funding, and to Kendra's point, like at the end of the day, all I'm trying to do is find the sweet spot between what Google's largest opportunity is or challenges and what our clients' challenges. And finding that sweet spot of where they meet in the middle and how I can make sure that I'm being the best partner to my customer, which is a Google seller's customer, which is the client, I think is really important. I can only run one study for each vertical that I support annually. And thinking about like kind of the pressure that comes along with really coming to the table with strong actionable insights that will actually ladder up to a client's business objectives, revenue, profit, volume, sales, market share, things that they really, really care about. I think it's tough, but I would say that when you approach a study with kind of looking at it in a couple different ways and thinking about all of the different potential data points that can ladder up to your core challenge, I think it makes it a lot easier. And then the last thing I would say is, we always say like, test frequently, accept the failures, and continue to iterate. And we do look for that sort of support from the vendors that we work with. Like if we have to pivot, be okay with pivoting. If you have to do something differently than what you had originally scoped, that's okay. I think as you learn through the process, you take those pieces and you shift as necessary, the same way you would as a marketer with a media plan. Like you change direction sometimes. And I think we just have to be okay with the agile nature of running a research project when it is custom and quant.
Great. And so we've got a couple of questions here. I'll take the first one through. We're being asked, what are your thoughts on integrating audio and video into studies? And in particular, trying to conduct qualitative studies at scale, which is a phrase we're hearing more and more. So who wants to go first on that?
Personally, we have never done audio. We have done video, and I'll say that when we have done video, it's been looking at traditional formats and the consumer kind of, downstream potential to be more aware of a product versus consider a purchase versus digital, aka like a video or a YouTube. And that can be done through, testing in an actual live environment. I think it's great. I think that it's not as passive as maybe some of the other options that are out there. I think that there can be some flaws, but we have done it before just to understand, again, like from creative messaging, I think what Kendra was talking about, like what really resonates when someone is exposed in a different format, media, creative, etc.
Yeah, it's probably not a direct answer to that question, but one thing I think about when I hear that is, how do we think about qualitative insight in conjunction with quantitative insight? And I'm fairly passionate in thinking about how do we translate qualitative learning into something that we can also quantify. So as we think about, getting to the point of sentiment coding and think about how do we translate things that are very qualitative, in-depth learning in nature into a way that we can feel fairly certain about, the quantification of that. So I have a lot of passion in that space and thinking about how do we continue to do more of that.
And so we've got someone picking up here, Kendra, on the phrase you use. Could you say a little bit more about the do research, the types of do research you do?
Yeah, well, as I think about do research, I mean, it's exactly what Pashmeena was talking about, is really looking at behavioral data. I mean, especially thinking about in a CPG context, we've done years of work based upon what people have claimed that they will do or their attitudes about things. The degree to which we can actually understand and observe behavior as it will be in market is going to allow us to be that much more certain that, we actually have real insight that we can move forward with in our decision making. So as I think about do, it really is about like, what will people do versus what they're saying, and looking at that behavioral piece. So as I think about do, just thinking about kind of the traditional set of tools at our fingertips today, it's about looking at what's happening within my panel data, what's happening from year to year, month to month, where are trends going, and then also being able to put alongside that some of the qualitative understanding to dig into the whys. But that's my perspective on that. I don't know, Pashmeena, whether there's more context that you would add there as you think about do versus say.
No, I 100% agree. It's spot on. I think if there are marketers in the room, like, your data is your do. Like, that is what your customers are actually saying they want from you in that experience. And I think, to Kendra's point, looking at that over time and understanding seasonality, or understanding UX and design and what's working and what's not working, and testing and iterating on your owned platform, I think is really important. I just think that for us, it truly is leveraging our partners in order to help us tell that story. So +1, completely agree.
And the final question, and this is quite a nice link also to the next presentation, which Mike Brown's going to be giving, is when we start to collect this do information, this passive information, trust is so important. So how do we balance keeping the trust of our customers, our users, our panelists, while we're collecting this sort of information about what people do? How do we balance those two together? Pashmeena, if you want to start, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is short and sweet. I mean, we're working with, panel providers that are no data is passed back. It is a part of their, commissioned panel that they have access to, and these are users who have opted in. And so we aren't, working with panel providers that are not under, strict guidance and rules.
Right.
And again, it's an opt-in panel, so the trust is there.
Super. And Kendra?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. It's about, ensuring that we have opt-in, that we are also on top of like the processes to which our third-party providers are following, to make sure that we're in accordance with any regulations. And I think it comes down to, I hearken back to my past of Dropbox, of being worthy of trust, and really showing up with, as you talked about, being worthy of trust across our partner network, which is inclusive of our consumers. So that's the way I think about that.
Fantastic. Pashmeena, Kendra, thank you for spending time with us this morning. It's been very much appreciated.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.